Hello everyone. This is the second video in a series about Middle-earth collectible card game strategy. I know I had said at the end of my last video that I was going to go into hazard construction because I wanted to break up with the how to support getting your points resources with a bit of knowledge about hazards. But on second thought, I do think it's better to do it here, and then we'll go into hazards in a later video. So the first video, we set up a 15 resource cards, which are going to be the cards that we are trying to get to score points up in what's basically the northwestern corner of the board. This video is going to be how to work out a plan for how we are going to get those resources, because our opponent is going to try to stop us, or at the very least slow us down. And they're mostly going to do that with their... There are a few automatic attacks in the places that we're going to, but generally automatic attacks are not very strong. And if you face nothing but the automatic attacks, you should easily be able to score your points that turn. Hell, a bunch of the petty dwarves actually are in a place with an auto attack, but the other four factions don't have auto attacks, and wherever we're going to go to play Goldberry and the Hound don't have auto attacks at all. So, with that in mind, we need to have some idea of what we're likely to run into. And I'd say there are four broad categories of hazards and a few that don't cleanly fall into them. Number one, we have creatures. Creatures are simple. Your opponent plays them, he attacks your party, forces you to... He might try to... your character... If you can't fend off the creatures, your characters might get wounded or even killed. Even if you can beat them, if the creatures are strong enough or your characters are weak enough, your characters might tap out facing them, and then you're unable to play anything worth anything that turn. Generally, to resist creatures, we either want to have high prowess characters who are capable of fighting them, or stealthy characters with support cards that are capable of hiding from them. This deck, I think we're going to go for a prowess setup, although we will have some stealth elements, like Goldberry, if we can get her out, can cancel an attack keyed to a wilderness, which is a stealthy ability. We also have Corruption. Now, whereas creature-style hazards generally aim to prevent your opponent from playing cards that are worth points, Corruption-style hazards punish them after they score the points. You put corruption cards on your opponent's characters. They have, you force them to make corruption checks, and hopefully they fail them, and you lose. Say, if we lost a character holding Wormsbane or a dwarf holding Durin's Axe, we lose the 4 points of the item and whatever the character is worth, and we have a hole in our party, and we go backwards a step. Never good. There's also a set of hazards which I'm going to call roadblocks. These are cards like Snowstorm and Long Winter, and cards that make it hard to move around. River is probably the most common roadblock hazard, and you'll see it in virtually every deck that you run into. Roadblock hazards, to really, really mess you up, do need a fairly fragile environment set up. So the best defenses I recommend against roadblocks are to have some Twilights in your decks that you can knock out the environments as needed. Maybe have some Marvel's Toll. Well, Marvel's Toll is just a good card anyway. The other thing is to always... Every party you send out should have at least one Ranger. Ideally two, although that's not always possible. The last set are cards like Muster Disperses, News of Doom, Call of Home. Cards that make you force you to make rolls against your general influence. They're mostly there, honestly, as a way of punishing you of taking all 20 of your starting general influence out in characters and having nothing in reserve. So, with that in mind, I'm going to try for this deck a prowess-based strategy. We've got a bunch of weapons here. I mean, we do have a couple stealth cards, but, we've got the weapons, and I do think we can make that work and have a, limited exposure to monsters. So I'm going to, at least for an aimed starting part, you don't always get to choose because, all the characters are unique, and if your opponent has the same one that you do, you're going to be in some trouble. Okay, good. There's a dream card version of Balan that I wanted to make sure we didn't draw. Okay, this is going to be my intended starting party. You'll note that 5 plus 3 plus 4 plus 8 uses all 20 of our general influence. But Eladon can follow Kurdan, Oin can follow Balan. So we can open up to 7 general influence right on the first turn, which gives us a pretty good shield against those GI-based hazards. These characters are all fairly strong. Okay, Oin's only a 3, but the others are strong. Most of them get bonuses against orcs, which, we are going through areas where orcs are a reasonably likely hazard. And everyone in the party is a warrior. We also have 2 rangers in the form of Oin and Eladon, so we're pretty well protected against things like rivers and other things that tap a ranger or something horrible happens. And we have 2 sages, which I want because I am going to be including 3 Marvel's Tolds in this deck, as I do in most of my decks. Now, Marvel's Told is a great card. You tap a sage to force the discard of a hazard, non-environment, permanent event, or long event. You do have to make a corruption check, but because almost all of these other hazards have various events that support them, being able to knock out a key component more or less whenever you need them is very useful, and then I need sages to make this run. Now, I still have another 12 cards we can put in. We definitely want to have some protection against corruption. No one in the party has any bonuses against corruption. Oin actually has a penalty. We've got some fairly corrupting items. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points of corruption worth of stuff that we're just intending to carry around. The Palantir I'm a little less worried about because I intend to store it, but I don't want to lose characters with anything. Now, the Marvel's Told will help somewhat against corruption because we can knock out a corruption card as needed, because again, Marvel's Told is great. But I'm also going to include some fellowships and some Friender 3s. By the way, I intend to pump up with, 3. I'll probably go over a bit and then cut down. That's at least how I tend to approach things. Fellowship will give us protection against both monsters and corruption. We could theoretically play it right away, although it will lock us in with that party because you can't add any more allies or characters without losing the Fellowship. A Friender 3 is just a good way of boosting either. This helps us protect against corruption checks, and if we need it to boost one of our influence checks against any of the characters. I should move these guys into the pool. The pool is where you're starting. While I'm thinking about characters, too, I'm going to include, let's see, we want Gloin. Gloin we should probably have in the pool as a backup. Not quite as good as Balan for this purpose. He's got a little more prowess, but he's also not a sage, which I do like having. For the Marvel's Told, I don't want to have Kurdan the only sage in the party. But in case our opponent plays Balan, Gloin's a good backup. I'm going to want Votelli. I'm going to want no one, and Baratar. The reason for these 3 characters is all of them can pop up in the home site of a faction, attempt to influence that faction, and if necessary I can discard them the next turn. Maybe, when I get a wizard, I generally decide on the wizard very last thing, although I do have some idea who I want as the wizard for this deck, just the way it's been shaping up. But and we will want some more backup characters, but I do want to have. I very much like having characters who are from the places that my factions are. So we have some protection against corruption. I'm going to include some risky blows and some blocks against creatures, and then maybe some new friendships, and maybe free to choose. Oh no, the free to choose won't help us very much because most of our items are worth 2 corruption points. I forget that one. Also, something for the this is more. I think I'm going to want 2 alliances of the free peoples, but in our sideboard, because we actually do have an elf, 2 dwarf, and a man faction. So we could, once, the thing is, I don't want to play this card until the factions are all in place. But if we do that, we could pump up our factions just by playing a card. And then kind of furthering that theme, I'm going to put in the Dunlendings and the Hillmen as, let's make sure we have the right, no. These are the minion versions. We don't want them. Just a stray thought. I'll go into sideboard strategy in a later video. So we are 3 cards overweight. We probably could include a few more theoretical cards, some ones that are kind of swirling around my head. Secret passage and or secret entrance to just make it a bit easier to move to sites. We have a lot of ruins and lairs we're planning on visiting for our items. So rebuild the town might be good for eliminating automatic attacks. Just a few other things like Hey Come Merry Doll, or a refuge that we could heal if we get into trouble. Although we don't really need a refuge. We have easy access to havens. And we're already a bit, quote-unquote, overweight. So let's see what we should get rid of, because we're going to need to get rid of... Basically, I'm trying to decide... Risky Blow and Block are good for finding creatures. A Friend or 3 and New Friendship are good for corruption. What's the overall balance we want for this? I am worried about corrupt. Like I said, these characters are fairly strong. I'm probably going to have some backups who are also burly sorts. So I'm a little more afraid of corruption right now. So I'm going to get rid of 2 blocks and a New Friendship. And here and I want some more backup characters. Some of them I'm going to put in our pool just because we might not get the characters we want in our draws. Let's have El Ro here. He's a good substitute for Belladon. There isn't really a good substitute for Oin, unfortunately. The rangers who can, fit under our dwarves are not easy to come by. If we don't get Caradan, I'll want Glorfindel. He's also a sage. He's actually stronger in combat. Now, he doesn't have as good direct influence, so he's not as good of a faction guy. I do think Caradan's overall a bit better. But Glorfindel is 3. So let's have Haldir as another... The idea here is that if we don't get Caradan, I'm basically planning, you have Caradan and one of Elrond's sons. Eladon or Elro here could follow Caradan, slip away from him if we want Caradan to influence a faction, go back under his direct influence when we don't. If my opponent plays Caradan as their first, because I'm probably going to reveal Caradan as my first. If the opponent does it and they both go back to the pool, then I'll want Glorfindel instead. same mind, pretty easy substitution. But Glorfindel only has 3 direct influence against elves, 2 otherwise. So instead of Eladon or Elrohir, who can't follow him, Haldir isn't as good, unfortunately. He doesn't have Ranger, he's weaker, he has corruption problems, but he can follow Glorfindel around. So that's 8 characters already. Gilder's another strong elven ranger, fighter ranger type. And let's have Boromir. We do have a Dunedain faction. Boromir's got the best prowess to mind ratio there is. He doesn't have any skills, but And let's have Celeborn. Don't intend to start with him, but another strong fighter. He's a sage, so he can use the Marvels Told. He's an elf, so he can help with the Elves of Lindon. And I think this is a good character. We'll probably exile some of these guys to remove from game when we arrive at our starting party, however it is. And that leaves a wizard. I think there are 2 primary wizards for running around in Eriador. Radagast, who is just awesome. And with this setup, I think we want Palando. Here's why. We want the hero version of these guys. Okay, so all wizards have some similar features. They all have 10 direct influence. They're all 6/9 prowess body. They all have 4 skills. They'll each have 2 unique special abilities. Radagast gets a +1 to his corruption checks, which is a bit nice. You don't want to lose your wizard to corruption of all people. He also gets to draw an extra card for each wilderness in the site path, and you might have noticed the area we plan on operating in has a lot of wilderness. In fact, this ability is so strong that I think that Radagast is the best of the 5 wizards just solely on that. Now, he's not a sage, so we can't do Marvels Told with him, which is a bit unfortunate. Palando starts in the Grey Havens, which is nice, which means we can set him up in either Rivendell or the Grey Havens as needed. The skill that he's missing is Scout, which is fine because we have nothing that uses Scouts. Keeping an extra card in your hand is always nice, and forcing your opponent to discard face up gives you some insight as to what they're planning. Now, the main reason, though, I'm choosing Palando as kind of the backup, because we can only have 3 wizards in the deck, is that he's from the Grey Havens, and we're kind of operating in and around the Grey Havens. The only other wizard we could easily play at the Grey Havens is Gandalf, but Gandalf's not a ranger, and, I do like rangers. And Gandalf's main ability is that he can tap to test a ring, and we have no rings, so that would be wasted on him. Anyway, this is what we have. I think this is a nice first draft for the resource side of the deck, and in the next episode in this series, we are going to design the hazard side. Then we'll probably go on to the sideboard, and the sideboard, and then maybe this one's for Fallen Wizards or Dream Card. That's not a format we're doing, but extra hazard or sideboard cards, really, in case we're up against a Fallen Wizard or a Balrog specifically. But one thing I did forget, actually, is that we get to start with 2 minor items. And we should really give some thought as to that. I don't think minor items are pretty much ever worth playing when, I don't include them in the decks very often, but you definitely you get to start with 2, so you may as well keep them. You can't start with horde items. I'm just going through some of them that hide the dream cards. We're not playing with dream cards. The ones that I'm considering for this deck. First up for consideration is the Starglass. The main reason I'm thinking about this one is that of the areas that we're going to play items, Lossenden Cairn, Barrow Downs, Isles of the Dead That Live, and possibly Heimring all have undead automatic attacks. It also gives us some bonus against wolves, spiders, spiders, wolves, and animals. And our setup is really strong against orcs, but the animals are something else that we can run into in Ariader, so it would give us a bit of protection against them. Healing herbs can be used and discarded to heal someone. That could be useful, and it's also good corruption-wise, because we can get rid of the item and its corruption point whenever we need to. Cram is similar. Cram we can just discard. Now, it won't heal you the way the herbs do, but we can discard it in order to untap someone. But we don't need to tap. We don't need to have an untapped bearer. Especially if we're in a position to just like play a lot of dogs at once, the cram can be useful. It can be useful just to, there's lots of times when you really want to untap someone. The Elven Cloak is useful because, again, we're hanging around in wilderness a lot. The ability to cancel a strike as needed is quite nice. Last but not least is the Elven Rope. Now, the extra thing about being able to move an extra region is kind of pointless for us, but this, in a non-obvious way, helps protect us. We do have a pretty strong prowess party, and there's a huge subset of creatures that our opponent might be willing to throw in to soften us up or force us to tap out. A lot of creatures in the game are only worth 1 point to kill. The Elven Rope, though, if we defeat them, we can put them with the Elven Rope and turn them in for 3 points. It makes it much less likely that our opponent is willing to throw sacrificial lambs towards us. And it's something that we can discard, well, store, really. And, I kind of like that idea. I'm not 100% sure it's the best, but let's... For our first draft, rope and Starglass. And with that, we have the resource side of the deck with our first draft finished. We'll want to tighten this up later at some point, I imagine, when we can play a game and analyze what went wrong and what went right. But this is a good first draft, and I would be willing to test this. Next up again is the hazard side of stuff. Hope you enjoyed.